You can just introduce this. No, I'll introduce.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, looks like nobody's gonna introduce us, so we're gonna just do it.
This is a pair that needs no introduction, James, apparently.
Right. Okay, thank you for closing that door. We're gonna get going with this next session here. Point this thing.
Well, I was pointing it there. Oh, we were working. Okay.
Oh. There we go.
I'm just going to start.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just going to have to read here because didn't know I was going to introduce y'all. So this session explains the failure mode mechanism process in the context of evidence weather events, discovered how extreme weather influences specific failure mechanisms, and learn about ongoing efforts to identify and address failure points with a particular focus on cold weather conditions. So our panel is Bill Fletcher. He is a senior technical advisor in enforcement, and James Hansen. Don't have your title here.
Yeah.
And one of the things we really wanted to thank was Richard Hackman, senior event analysis advisor for NERC, was really instrumental in helping us with the preparation. For me, it was a combination of some interests that led to James Hansen sponsoring my participation in the failure mode mechanism group, and really got to know this. And then over time evolved, we thought, wow, this would be useful for small and medium entities, and maybe using in a toolkit approach, especially for the first iteration of extreme weather is cold weather. And Mr. Hackman's group has been doing some really exciting things. And then at the same time, he announced in one of the early meetings, we're really looking to socialize this work and find applications for it. And so this was a really natural fit. Mr. Hackman has done and that group has done an incredible amount of work, as you'll see. And we really think that one of the things you'll start to see is this is probably an evolution in how we think about reliability, moving from root cause analysis, which is still valuable, but the reusability and applications that when you take a failure mode effects analysis approach, which other domains and industries, you saw a little bit of that at an Xterra presentation in March around compliance, where they were looking at it, but where they were borrowing pages from the playbook. One was from aerospace, other infrastructures, other types of domains where failure mode effects analysis is very, very valuable. And it ends up being reusable and applicable in ways that you don't always see. So with that, go ahead, James.
All right. So by raise of hands before today, how many of you knew that there was a failure modes and mechanisms working group in the NERC committee structure? Oh, David Lemons. All right. I think I got one hand. My follow-up question is going to be really weak then. How many of you are using any of these diagrams? David? No, not even one. Okay. This is why I call the failure modes and mechanisms diagrams NERC's best kept secret. They're not being used to their benefit. And we're going to go into how they can be used, how to gain access to them. So session objectives, introduction to the failure modes and mechanisms working group. I've just given what you're going to get right there. I mean, NERC has that committee. They're working on these diagrams. Bill's going to introduce the failure modes and mechanisms, what a failure analysis looks like when you're using failure modes and mechanisms. Again, how does this differ from doing a root cause analysis? From there, I'm going to jump into some of the failure mode and mechanisms, applicability to cold weather, and Bill is going to continue on with that. These are diagrams that are available to industry. These are diagrams that you cannot go to the NERC website and download, though, and I think that's part of why we don't have such widespread usage of these diagrams. What it takes to get copies of these is to reach out to your regional representative within the NERC event analysis program and request those. Any guess on why they're not available for public download? Bueller? Nothing? Okay. It gets down to details. It gets down to details of how major equipment on our system can fail. So if these get into the hands of bad actors, they know exactly how to cause a failure on a piece of major equipment. So while they are available to industry, we don't have them publicly available on the NERC website. So that's, please reach out to me. My team can provide access to those. And we are always open for question and answers. So, all right. So how did the failure modes and mechanisms working group, it used to be a task force 2 years ago, they were promoted to a working group. How did they come about? Well, 12 years ago, NERC put together an AC equipment task force, and they were tasked with certain things. Coming back, one of their recommendations was, they said, we as an industry should analyze common BES equipment failure modes and mechanisms and trend those. And then they included bullet points. How should we do this? That first bullet point, an addendum for failed equipment station, that is tied directly to NERC's event analysis program. So my team at WEC, we have the delegated functions of event analysis, situational awareness, and performance analysis. So we are the ones that are reaching out when there's an event on the system. We're asking you to fill out brief reports. We are asking you to fill out these failed station equipment addendums. This allows us to track equipment failures. This has been helpful in the past. Some of you may have heard of the Hitachi 345 breaker issue several years ago. By entity, it was very difficult to see that there was an issue. As we started looking at these same failure modes throughout the nation, we identified a systemic issue. Hitachi got involved and was able to do a retrofit to fix some of those. But there is power in gathering and trending those type of failure patterns. So second bullet, investigate and identify failure modes and mechanisms of BES equipment. You go down to the green circle there to do the same thing for generation, both synchronous and asynchronous generation resources. That's really where the failure modes and mechanisms task force got its legs. And then they were not directed or there wasn't any guidance to develop these diagrams, but it became a logical approach to start developing these diagrams to show where these failure mechanisms tied to the failure modes and some of the contributing factors that lead to them. So you have this slide deck, the reference to the failure modes and mechanisms site on the NERC website is there. It's limited, I'll tell you right now. and because their main work product are these diagrams, and these diagrams aren't downloadable right from their site, there's not a ton of information on that site. All right, this slide just kind of gives an idea of what type of equipment these diagrams have been created for. So there are currently 18 released. We just got an email, 2 additional that are very close to being released. There's others that are in draft mode. And take a look at the sides of that table there. These are entities that have given their subject matter experts time to work on developing these diagrams. I take a look at this table and I see hundreds of hours of subject matter experts expertise going into these diagrams right here. And that's why I think it's kind of a shame that they're not being used more, because there's so much value that comes from these. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill. He's going to talk about failure modes and mechanisms. So.
And actually, the other part I want to point out with this slide really is the human capital, right? That represents a substantial investment of time and expertise, which the grid survives on the strength of the foundation of all of you participants with your expertise and as practitioners. So this is work worth using, and it is reusable in ways that root cause analysis is not as reusable. You don't want it to be reusable, but a root cause analysis and a solution and a corrective action fixes that problem. But if a more systemic look can avoid what we have seen sometimes over back in a compliance or after the event analysis can be, you can kind of have a whack-a-mole effect where you fix one fix one problem and then there's another problem, and you fix that and the two aren't linked. And the failure mode mechanisms approach is very powerful. It's something I'm very passionate about, not just because I told my boss I wanted a goal that involved risk-informed decision-making somehow, although I hope he looks at that favorably. I had no idea when I set that up whether or not failure mode effects analysis was going to come into the fore and be socialized. The fact that we're not using it yet here, that's actually a good thing, because that's part of what James and I want to do, is socialize this. The other thing about the security part that James mentioned is that this presentation and the content comes to you is public. It was carefully vetted internally and with Mr. Hackman's expertise about any parts. There may be some portions that are redacted, but we're very careful about what was already released as public. So what would a before the break presentation be without a Slido poll about your thoughts about failure mode analysis versus root cause analysis? And we'll go ahead and start that. What comes to mind when we talk about failure mode analysis versus root cause analysis? This is for you to enter. There's no right or wrong answers.
And we're not going to move on until we have 100% participation. So.
Are you going to conduct assurance visits based on lack of participation?
Yes. Absolutely.
What versus why? Okay. Definitive versus speculative. Human versus equipment. Actually, the next to our presentation in March they were looking at where some of the human performance risks were when they were looking from a ticking compliance. So I've never thought about a failure mode analysis. That's okay. That's why we're here.
Don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
Hope you can have a better understanding after this. If not, we failed. So
We're not going to fail.
Okay.
This is good. So we'll go a little bit more here because we still have some more people. Mechanical versus predictive. Or a failure mode could be applied to prevent issues in other areas. Yes. Looking at it, right. We'll take a couple more, then we'll move on. How do we operate in an emergency versus why we are in an emergency? The failure mode affects analysis to emergency operation plan. I had not thought of that, but that's a potential application, which is more process rather than equipment. But absolutely, that right there is a good way to think about that. Patterns of what could happen versus what did happen. We're starting to get a little bit closer here. Okay, we'll give one more and then we'll go ahead. So this is the behavior. Then we'll move on or we'll run out of time. But this is great. I really like the variety of responses and thoughts. Okay, so what we came up with, this is an incomplete list. It's not definitive. It's not the only answer, but a few things that come out is that, with root cause analysis generally is after the fact, event specific. The failure scheduled you, that was one I liked. I think Mr. Hackman came up with that. And it's often backward looking, like in the postmortem, it's 5 or more whys. I saw one, it was root cause analysis on, one of the space shuttle accidents, and they had like 20 whys, something to that effect. But the other, in failure mode, it is reusable. It can be very forward looking. It can be very proactive and preventive if you make that time investment. It can be, if you're familiar with risk priority numbers or registering risks, you could prioritize, okay, here are the failure modes, which ones are more likely than others. And we're going to dive into that a little bit when we pick on, selected applications for cold weather. And failure mode analysis does have the benefit of preventing the failure from scheduling you, potentially. Or afterwards, you can find a video that is after the fact analysis, after a very well-known, I probably will slaughter the pronunciation here, Sayano Shoshin Kaya Unit 2 failure. If you're into failure modes after the fact, it was a dramatic and tragic accident in Russia with a hydro unit. And it really had a very dramatic failure mode. That's after the fact analysis, and you can find that. So what the failure modes mechanisms working group comes up with is that failure modes, from their perspective, are what gets your attention. They are how the equipment gets going on a path toward failure. Typically, it's an equipment focus, but as someone mentioned in the Slido, can be forward-looking for process, logical cause effect, physical evidence examination. Aging is not a cause. That's a slow-term, slow-moving failure mode mechanism, age of equipment. Failure mechanisms are detectable if you get there in time. I think I remember when the NERC alert came out on breakers, James, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that alert came out, and I think within 48 hours, we actually had one fail in Western Interconnect. So the alert came out, it was true to that, but that was really the original work that started looking at is on breaker failure modes. And that's why we're going to use that as an example, not for small and medium entities necessary to go after their SF6, but to show really the thinking that got into this. And then how is this being applied to what we're thinking about in terms of small and medium entities in generation and cold weather. So this is we're going to show what a generic failure mode mechanism diagram looks like. This group starts with basically you take failed equipment type or the equipment type, and then what are the different ways that it could fail? You could apply this to a toaster on your countertop in your home or your automobile, or in the electric grid, a power plant, a transmission system, a control center. In terms of equipment, but as someone mentioned in the slide, it could be applied elsewhere too. The failure mode mechanisms here, they're primarily with equipment and then trying to map, getting back to looking at the equipment and the different ways it can fail. And similar to how, like, Donovan was talking about standards development, you may do a mapping, but then things happen. And if you have a general idea with some specifics about your failure modes, and then when things happen, you do your root cause analysis and say, okay, we have some specific instances that map to these failure modes. So they evolve over time and they're reinforced with lessons learned. And you'll see that. So they tend to be logically oriented, that it could be, this thing or that thing, or a combination of this and this. Sometimes in root cause, you say, well, we had a failure or an accident or event because of several low risk items lining up at all the same time, that then we had that. You could call it the shots on goal or Swiss cheese effect. This is an attempt to try to figure out those ahead of if you can find those before they happen. All right, so this is a really busy slide. The idea is that we're going to break some of these down to show, we're going to get eventually to the specifics of what the cold weather or what the failure mode mechanism group is doing. So this is your generic SF6 breaker failure mode diagram that they came out with. And what the failure mode mechanisms group, and I don't have the exact timeline on this, James, but one of the things they've started doing, particularly with the interest in extreme weather and starting with cold weather, is, are there things that we're learning or things that are happening with that are where we know some failure modes and have mapped them with things like the sulfur hexafluoride? Are there particulars that we know about, or there are risks associated with cold weather? And what they're doing with these diagrams is you start to see that with the snowflakes, and we'll show those in a little bit more detail.
All right. So this is going to be your test at the end of the hour. So take good notes. It's busy, right? There's a lot that can go into the failure of a breaker, though. So we're going to, like Bill said, we're going to take a look. As you reach out, these are going to come in PDF. So you're going to get these diagrams. You're going to be able to zoom in on different sections because there's going to be a failure mode that you want to track. You're going to take that path down. You're going to see various different mechanisms that could lead to that failure mode. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at the failure of a bushing. All right, causing an external fault. You follow that down. There's various different ways that can cause that failure of the bushing. Okay, bridging by an object. All right, that's one path. And you take a look towards contamination, which is to the path to the right. There's some notes on there that's pointing right to contamination. Let's see, right. Oh my gosh, what
You've
the
got it.
hell?
Oh, well, contamination we've got over here.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Looking at the wrong part. Sorry about that. And I just swore,
Thought
sorry.
I was in trouble there. I put the slides
No.
up.
No, this right here, and I don't know if you can read it, but it says this is more common in times of drought. Okay. Contamination builds over time. All right. It can be dust, it can be ice, it can be salt, it can be bird excrement. All right. There's a lot of different things that can build up on these bushings over time. And you can start tracking across those bushings leading to failure. One of those contaminants, it can be ice. So you get little nuggets of information like that. Hey, if you're in a dry area, your contamination issue may be more. We were at a power plant just a couple of days ago, and walking down with this entity, they said, we're in a dry area right here. We have these bushings washed twice a year. And If we didn't, we know we would get tracking issues with this. So, that's a little nugget to say, is this part of our plan right here? Or where are we? Are we in a dry area? Are we subject to tracking across our bushings because, we haven't seen a lot of rain and we get this buildup? But as we take a look at that snowflake right there, that is just a little symbol they started using to say, hey, this is something that is cold weather related. Snow and ice can lead to these bushing failures. Very common piece of equipment on the system, very common failure mode. And the question, and then, this is where you ask yourself, what are we doing to prevent this type of failure mechanism on this piece of equipment? Because you all have them, right? So let's look at another piece of, another failure mode here. All right. We have had issues where these breakers have not operated or they've been slow to operate in cold weather conditions. What's leading to that? Well, we've got a gas breaker here, but there's mechanical movements within that. Those mechanical pieces of the equipment, they've got lubricant on them to allow them to operate very quickly. And when it gets cold, that lubricant starts gumming up. This turns to sludge instead of a nice, good lubricant to allow the opening and closing of that breaker. And we have seen failure to open. We have seen slow to open. Neither of them are desirable, leaving faults on the system longer than they should and causing remote equipment to operate and clear that fault. Let's take a look at, okay, go ahead, Bill.
Oh, yeah. And just one thing, because we realize these eye charts, but we're fond of toolkits. So the yellow ovals those are mapping lessons learned that are on the NERC website.
You're still my thunder, Bill.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
Well, you see these yellow boxes right here. Okay, we got these snowflakes over here. That's telling us, hey, this is a cold weather potential problem. What's getting mapped? Yeah, we've got a lessons learned library within NERC, okay? These are lessons learned written by industry for industry. Okay, over 200 of these lessons learned. These, you can search NERC's website. Actually, search Google, NERC Lessons Learned Library, because you'll spend 10 minutes trying to find it on NERC's website. Google will take you right to it. So these are great documents. This is an event case right here. Somebody had this exact same issue. They said, look, I don't want my peers to learn the hard lesson that I learned. Okay, so you get the problem statement on there, you get the corrective actions that they've taken, and then you get the lessons learned that they had. So my dad taught me that a smart man learns from his mistakes. An even smarter man learns from somebody else's mistakes. Okay, learn from events from your peers. That's why these are out here. And that's really what's neat about this is we've got a diagram of a common piece of equipment. Okay, we're bringing in, hey, we know that this is a potential failure mode related to cold weather. And if you want more information, you can take a look at this lessons learned that a peer has provided about a real live event on the system. So that is, I hope you're starting to see, boy, these diagrams really do start tying multiple work products together as we start diving into these a little bit more. So this slide right here, little bit different from the SF6 breaker. The SF6 breaker had multiple failure modes, and some of those mechanisms were related to cold weather. What the Failure Modes and Mechanisms Task Force has done is they've created a few of these, and this is specific to cold weather. Okay, all of these failure modes tied to cold weather. So if you have a wind fleet, my recommendation when you're putting together a generator readiness plan would be to pull up a diagram like this and say, what in our plan is addressing these known failure modes here? And you can see four main failure modes right here that we'll talk about. Equipment failure, that's your fuel source, inadequate wind, electric power issue, and then a control failure. So let's dive into some of the, and another interesting part right here, even just in the title there's a tie to some lessons learned. We start tying into different storms that we've had on the system. Let's dive into some details here. Okay, this background, that's called blade liberation right there. That's a really fancy way of saying you've just shot your blades off your turbine. It doesn't happen. That's a failure mode that doesn't happen very often, thankfully. It probably wouldn't have as many windmills if we were shooting 200-foot blades around commonly. But yeah, there's some really cool YouTube videos if you've got some spare time. Not now. There's a test, remember? So, yeah, unit failure. So we start tying, hey, this is a well-known issue. In fact, it was a major contribution from unit failure equipment to a small winter storm, February 2021. I think somebody called it Uri. Yeah, that's what we're talking about right there. Winter Storm Uri. We're starting to pull in disturbance reports now into these. So now we've pulled in lessons learned. We pulled in disturbance reports, and we continue down, and we say the most common failure seen in Uri, leading to wind loss, that's due to blade icing. Okay, so those blades ice up. There's so much weight on them. They're not going to move. You're not going to generate energy on those. What was the issue there? What's the solution? Well, it's a cold weather package on your wind system. You generally put that in when you install, and that's typically part of your original design. Can come after the fact. It becomes very expensive that way. And David, if there's a correction corner, yeah, I welcome it.
The cold weather package on a wind turbine does nothing for blade icing.
Okay.
The cold weather package for wind turbines addresses lubrication, heaters for that type stuff. Has nothing to do with blade icing. And if the regulators don't understand that, we need to be sure we're getting that message out.
Yeah. Okay. So blade icing is going to happen regardless of whether you have a cold weather package or not. So, but commonly seen, we saw gigawatts stranded in Uri because of blade icing. Not what do we do about it? No, it's a known problem. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. Actually, yeah, okay. And this is going to be the background of this next slide. This is just showing the complexity of a wind turbine. There can be over 8,000 different components putting together a single turbine. These are complex devices. As we take a look at failure mode, I'm going to talk about failure mode number 2 was fuel loss. Okay. In this case, there's no wind. And we say, well, what do we do in that case? Well, that's why it's a pretty empty, there's no path beyond loss of fuel. But I did want to talk about it a little bit. It becomes an issue because Winter Storm Heather was less than 2 years away, 2 years ago. Winter Storm Heather, we don't hear a whole lot about because there wasn't any large-scale outages. But energy was tight for several days in Winter Storm Heather. We had several energy emergency alerts. There was one particular balancing authority that, well, it's a generator owner, has over 800 megawatts of wind in their generation portfolio. The new forecast was going to be low. They were predicting about 120. They had single digits that day out of 800 megawatts of wind, less than 10 megawatts of production. They went into an emergency alert 3 because they were low on reserves. I share that because we do see this. This is a time where we've really needed energy. There's not a whole lot we could do about it. There was no wind. And we've seen this in cold and hot weather extremes. The 2022 heat dome, the wind contribution was very low as well in the Western interconnection. And I just point that out that there's a lot of value that goes towards a diversified generation portfolio. Now let's talk about electric power issues. This is you're having, it could be, again, we have a lessons learned that's being pointed out here. Loss of wind turbines due to a voltage transient. Again, looking here, grid voltage or frequency out of band. We have our IBR performance guideline. We're now bringing in guidelines. We've had disturbance reports, lessons learned. Now there's industry guidelines that are being brought in to these diagrams to be able to share, like, this is happening, this is real, we have to pay attention to it. What happened December 2022? This is Winter Storm Elliott right here. So we're bringing information in from a relatively recent storm, a very impactful storm, and bringing it down. What we're leading, you know, the power failure, the power issue within Winter Storm Elliott had to do with inverters. Some of it had to do with inverters. And large inverters, they can be air or liquid cooled. Anytime you have liquid in extreme cold, that becomes a potential vulnerability, a potential failure point. Also, contactors have temperature limitations on them. And the contactors within these inverters were not rated for the low temperatures that were seen during Elliott. So tied to another disturbance report right there. All right. We're going to talk about control failures. These can typically happen in two different ways: remote or local. Local, you usually have a plant power outage or equipment outage. Remote, they can be those similar things. You can have a loss of communications, less frequently, but a possibility could be a cyber attack as well. Something interacting between you and the plant at that control center. So while there are a lot of potential paths on here, Bill actually has an example from a previous job that actually happened in this failure mode. So Bill, you want to share that example?
Sure. Thanks, James. And one thing I was going to mention on the lessons learned with some feedback there is that I think, as far as I know, the failure mode mechanism working group welcomes participation. If there are things in the lessons learned where there was a mapping that maybe is incorrect or asserts something that, like say, a cold weather package doesn't, these are living documents and they get better by learning, most of which we started at the top of the hour with coming from industry, because that's where the expertise is. So the example James is referring to, it's interesting going through this and looking at the failure mode mechanisms. I had an aha moment. I was acting in a communications engineering role supporting a hydro project. This was around 2005, so pre-order 693. The project would not even qualify as category 2, but it was FERC licensed. And I get an urgent call from the hydro folks that forebay control is off. And so that's our 6 and 7 megawatt generators that we depended on as a small utility were offline. And it was very cold. It was, well, it was just slightly below seasonal. So we go up, look at it. It's a relatively new control system. And if you look at the mapping here, there's a notation there for control failures that could be related to physical fiber optics for telecommunications. Well, that was state of the art. How could that be? So we look at it, and here's a long conduit outside. It had been well below freezing. There was a fiber optic cable in there. Why would that fail? The vendor, the contractor had installed a long fiber optic jumper, and that jumper was specified for inside plant in a data center. So the failure mode, freezing, water getting into the conduit and freezing, that jumper was not providing enough protection to the fiber. It kinked it, broke it. System went offline. And thanks to a neighboring or a utility in the region that had the specification of outside plant fiber, we were able to get up and running. They overnighted us a spool of fiber and we fixed it. But point being is that I looked at this, oh wow, look at that. So this is the reusability, and we're going to demonstrate that in a little bit more.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. All right. Okay, this is going to be, we're going to talk about a recent failure mechanism that has been added to this slide or to this diagram, and that is the failure mechanism of weather-related failure. And some of these were seen from in Winter Storm Elliott. Well, Winter Storm Elliott. So, and there's several of these. Anytime you have liquid, a lubricant, when it gets extreme cold, you need to make sure that that liquid is, that it is designed for those temperatures that you're seeing. If not, that is definitely a failure mode that is a failure mechanism that can lead to the loss of your plant. You get snow and ice loading. This can impact conductors, it can impact cables, it can impact structures. That can get very heavy very quickly, and it can lead to failures. Ventilation areas where you're pulling air in, that can become the air flow can be blocked and result in failures. So there's several of these as pointed out over here. Any one of these can be a failure mechanism for a wind generator, and really it's before I pass this off to Bill, I just want to emphasize that, you know, there's a lot of work that goes into these diagrams, and we're intentionally making ties to other work products. These work products can help put together good plans, whether they be maintenance plans, whether they be readiness plans for seasonal, winter, summer, whatever they be. These are good resources, and we encourage you and your entity to look into them further. So, Bill?
Thanks, James. Yeah, another quick anecdote for, you know, when I'm not working on grid reliability, I'm a general aviation pilot. aircraft owner, and several of my checklists are really, those checklists are derived from failure mode mechanisms. And I have some for cold weather because the maker of the airplane knows if you don't do certain things, if you don't follow that operating handbook, you are likely to incur additional risk. And then the FAA, if something were to happen, is going to come and ask the pilot and the owner why they weren't following the operating handbook that the manufacturer so carefully designed. So we did get Elliott there. So the next example, we're going to walk through a combustion turbine, just an inlet icing example, another one that the failure mode mechanism group worked on. Gas generation loss from cold weather, starting with primary failure mode. Again, the flow diagram that will come back to weather and some weather mechanisms. And if you have things to comment on, go ahead, James. Where did this originally come from? February 2021, 34,000 megawatt outage. So that there was a lot of learning that came in on that. We have a link to the presentation on those cold weather outages and what was happening with regard to cold weather and loss of gas generation. This is just a representative plant diagram that sometimes when failure mode mechanisms are working or are developed, you can look at this. This one in particular is specific to inlet heating and evaporative cooling. No vendor is referenced here on purpose. Gas unit fails to generate during cold weather. So the preference would be to figure out what the potential failure mode mechanisms are versus a root cause analysis. Sometimes you do start with a root cause analysis, or the root cause analysis augments what your failure mode mechanisms development looks like. Here's one where there was equipment critical to the unit operation. There's a mapping of the failure. Control airline flow, frozen valves, inlet air. Lack of protection from the weather, combined with weather severity and duration capable of causing failure. All right, this next section. We're going to go back to a diagram we went through and look at inverters. This is embedded in the failure mode diagrams. And James, if I remember correctly, we don't have one specific to inverter-based resources yet, correct?
No, that one's under draft right now.
What we do have is going back to where inverters are present within equipment and where there is some failure mode mechanisms going back to February 2021. And if you look down here at the bottom, inverter can come in here where you have lower inverter temperatures or heat trace failures and or things like uninterruptible power supplies that can have performance degradation in cold weather. And to show the reusability here, this is coming from wind turbine installations. But if you had systems in facilities that you're looking at for cold weather preparation with inverters, there may be opportunities here to look at that with regard to where inverters are being used. So in this particular case, a known issue was coolant froze during a cold weather event. And then large inverters can be liquid cooled, small inverters are air cooled. It's also referenced in a NERC reliability guideline and a lesson learned. This led to grid frequency of voltage out of band and electric power issue. James, do you have anything to add on that? So on this slide, and then we're just about ready for any questions from the audience or online. This is where tried not to steal the thunder there, James. These are the lessons learned that NERC did a presentation on in September, and the failure mode mechanisms group participated with some slides. So these are the double L's that have specifics to cold weather and mappings. And so we think that those are worth your attention. There's a link to every one of those in the presentation. At the end of this presentation, during the break, we're going to play a video that NERC has put out too with regard to cold weather. You might find that interesting while you're on your break. Two particular double L's that are highlighted here are inlet air duct icing. If you start to get a buildup there with the inlet, and then anti-icing control strategies on turbine.
Yeah, those are two very common issues on taking gas plants out or making it unavailable to start up. So those are great lessons learned. We've had several assurance visits with gas plants that this is one of their number one issues that they're dealing with. So learning what others have done regarding this failure mode is definitely going to be worth your while.
And with that, we are in the questions mode for anyone from the audience or online. And do we have any online questions, Bailey?
No online questions at this
Okay.
time.
One thing I have, courtesy of Curtis Cruz, he has lent something to me. Not that I would definitely not feel liberated if I were at a wind project with a liberated wind turbine, but I do have an artifact that he had from one of those liberations. It's a large bearing that survived. Although if you look at the surface of it, it's clear it had something going on with it, and it's not necessarily causative, but you want to see what one of those. I had never really seen one up in personal, but I have one if you want to take a look. If there's no questions.
We have a question in the
Looks
room.
like there
Oh,
was a
go ahead.
question. Yeah.
Hi, Zecha Van Hoos, Clark Public Utilities. We have a combined cycle gas turbine, and GE is our O&M partner on that. And I'm a little bit curious how you are seeing those O&M type entities roll out more of this approach versus a root cause analysis.
First of all, thank you for that combined cycle plant. I'm actually a Clark Public customer, and every time it's cold weather, I'm very thankful that the River Road project is up and running. Got to visit that for an audit. It's a fantastic facility. Go ahead, James. You want to?
Man, you jumped right in there. I thought you were going to answer the question. You know, I think different OEMs are going to take different approaches. I think root cause analysis is typically the way that things have been done in the past. I mean, something's happened. Let's investigate it. Let's find what happened. Let's find some corrective actions and let's learn from it. You saw that list of lessons learned. That's typically what you're looking at with those lessons learned. Something's happened. Some lessons were learned from it. They're in a better place because of this, but they did go through it. The thing with failure modes and mechanisms is you're identifying the weaknesses in your system prior, and you're developing something that can proactively address these. Okay, so whether it be a maintenance plan, whether it be a cold weather assurance or a cold weather readiness plan, whether it's whatever you want to, whatever that looks like, it's more of an attempt to identify prior to failure. You know your weaknesses, you put some eyes on it. If you can, alarm on them, and that's a better. Well, that is That's a more proactive approach than we typically see when we're looking at more of the traditional root cause analysis. So, anything else?
And maybe that one of the benefits of what I get to do at WAC, what I do and who I do it with, is working with people like James. So I've had 2 presentations now. I think the first time in 17 years I've done 2 presentations and not mentioned a standard once. So you mentioned O&M, which I'm glad it wasn't O&P. But one thought might be that if you're contemplating looking at your cold weather, looking at the failure mode mechanisms, might be, again, this is not, I do not have regulator hat off, but one thought to your question would be, if I were in your shoes, what position would I look at the cold weather, perhaps look at the lessons learned, and then maybe work with GE and say, do maybe a gap analysis. How do we look like we're doing? And I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but that's an off the cuff remark and thought. But I really do appreciate that combined cycle plant, because when it's cold, we really need it, and because of some unique characteristics of where we are, where our load is relative to generation. James?
I guess if no further questions, just a closing remark, and it's, please reach out. Let's utilize these diagrams. There's a lot of value in them, and I hope you're seeing it. If it's not you that needs this, please get back, and please get back with your design, your engineering team, your maintenance teams. Let them know that these diagrams are available. The more they're used, the more they improve. We do revisions as we get input on these, and they become more and more beneficial as we get those revisions in. So, thanks for your time. Please reach out. I'm happy to provide these diagrams to anyone interested. Thanks.